All right, so we left off in the last video about sharpening by talking about the detail panel here inside of Camera Raw, and I went through all these different sliders here. Well, one of the things that I mentioned in that video was this was called capture sharpening. This is just phase one. Just do your exposure, do any of your color adjustments, and then come in here and do your capture sharpening, which is just a quick sharpening. You don't have to spend a lot of time on this. A lot of times we come up with favorite settings. So even though I might have taken 5 minutes in the video to explain this stuff, most of the time I come in here and just go bam, 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 zoom into my photo into 100%, look at the before and after. Okay, good, I'm done. But we come up to the next part, which is going to be creative sharpening. Creative sharpening says, all right, now there's parts of the photo that I want to sharpen selectively. I want to draw more attention to something. In this example, it might be the eyes. It might be some of the texture here and the little hat that she's wearing. But I want to draw attention to something. Okay, and that's called creative sharpening. You're doing some selective sharpening. Well, we can do this again inside of Camera Raw. I'm going to show you 2 ways in this video, one in Camera Raw, one in Photoshop. But let's start off, if you've got Camera Raw 5 or above, which I do, which came with Photoshop CS4, all right, you've got the adjustment brush. Inside the adjustment brush, you have a slider over here called sharpness. So I'm going to crank that sharpness slider way up, which is kind of one of the things that might be limiting about this tool because it is only one slider, but we're going to give it a try, and a lot of times it does work well. We're going to crank it way up, and what you do is you just start to brush on the areas that you want to add some extra sharpening to. All right, so let's come in here, make my brush a little bit bigger, get the top of the hat over here on the left side. All right, maybe we can come down here. We don't have to get down too much down onto her face, but the main areas I was looking for are going to be her eyes and her hat. All right, so let's take a look at this photo here. We've got it zoomed into 100%, which means we'll see the sharpening. So here's before, and here's after. All right, this isn't the sharpening that we did back over here in the detail panel. Okay, that's already applied to this photo. What we just saw was our adjustment brush sharpening. Okay, again, here's the preview, before and then after. So we've definitely added some creative sharpening. We've kind of over sharpened some of these areas that we want to draw people's attention to. Once again, before and then after. Okay, so that's one way you can do it. And most of the time, I've actually started to find that this works pretty well. I wasn't a big fan of doing sharpness with the adjustment brush, mainly because I just never used it a lot. I was so fixed in my ways of doing it in Photoshop, but I've actually found that it works pretty well here. So a lot of times, that's it. I mean, if you're happy with your level of sharpening here, you're done. All right, but sometimes, just because of the nature of this slider, you might not be able to get the sharpness that you want here. Okay, so what I'm actually going to do is let's just bring it down. So let's just assume I can't get the level of sharpness that I want here. I've got a photo with a lot of little details, and I really want to crank the sharpening up in some part of this photo, right? And I can't do it inside of Camera Raw. So what I can do is I can open the image into Photoshop, which already has that first level of sharpening applied to it. I can open my image here inside of Photoshop, and now I can use Photoshop's tool to really crank up the level of sharpening and also have a lot of control in where this sharpening goes. So let's first duplicate the layer. Command J on the Mac, Control J on the PC. Let's zoom in a little bit here. All right. And then I'm going to go up to the filter menu. I'm going to run the sharpening filter on it. Let's go down to Sharpen, Unsharp Mask. Inside here, I'm gonna over sharpen a little bit because I want you to be able to see it on screen. All right, because just by nature, videos tend to get a little bit soft. So I'm going to over sharpen more than I would normally sharpen here. In fact, I'm going to crank it way up. Here's before, here's after. So you should definitely be able to see the sharpening inside of this photo here. Okay, before and after. So let's go ahead and click OK. And what we can do now is add a layer mask to it. So I'm going to hold down my Option key on Mac, my Alt key on a PC. All right, and what that does, here, watch what happens when I add a layer mask. See, it just goes white. But if I hold down Option or Alt, and then I press the layer mask button, it goes black. And also take a look at the image here. Watch it, before, after. It's actually, the mask has come in as black, which means that it's hidden all of my sharpening. Okay, the mask is coming in hide mode basically. It's hidden all of my sharpening. Since I know I only have a small area I want to sharpen, I grab my brush tool, I set the foreground color to white, and now I just paint on that mask with white. Okay, and now I can get in there and I can selectively sharpen, or what they call creative sharpening. It doesn't matter what you call it. You can call it round 2 of sharpening. It really doesn't matter too much. But I can come in here and selectively go inside and sharpen parts of the photo. Let's zoom in a little bit here and you can see the difference. I know it's a little over sharpened, but again, I just want to make sure you can see it. Here's before, here's after. Okay, before and then after. So there you've got 2 ways to do the next phase of sharpening inside of Photoshop or Camera Raw. Honestly, I suggest you try to stick with Camera Raw as much as you can. That's where digital imaging capture is going if you're a photographer. So stick inside of that Camera Raw dialog box. Everything is non-destructive. You don't have to worry about layers. You don't have to worry about any of that stuff. And it does work pretty well. This Photoshop trick is only if you just can't get that level of extreme sharpening. You've got a photo with a lot of detail that can hold a lot of sharpening, and you just can't get that level that you're looking for or that control that you're looking for inside of Camera Raw. Well, then you can come into Photoshop, add that layer, throw the layer mask on there, and then you've got a very controlled way to do some creative sharpening here. Okay, so you've got phase 1, which was the first video, which talked about sharpening, doing the capture sharpening. Right, that was the detail panel in Camera Raw. You've got phase 2, which is the creative sharpening. The last video, or the last part of this, is a breeze. It just talks a little bit about output sharpening. This doesn't even really affect everyone, but it's at least something to consider when you're going to print your photos. You definitely want to take a look at the extra level of sharpening that we can do.